Okay, this is student handout 3, distributing a negative number. We've already talked last section about the distributive property. So now we're going to be distributing a negative number. We dealt with positive numbers the last lesson. So you should all be on student handout 3 in your binder. If you haven't gotten there, turn there now. And it should look like this top part right here. A negative sign indicates the opposite of the number. So we're going to do some simple things right here. List the opposite of each of the terms below. Okay, opposite of the number, changing the signs. So the opposite of a positive 8 would be a negative 8. Opposite of a negative 5 would be a positive 5. Real hard stuff. Opposite of a positive x, remember a 1's understood to be there, so opposite of a positive 1x would be a negative 1x, or just negative x. The opposite of a negative 3x would be obviously 3x. Opposite of a positive 1 would be negative 1. And opposite of a negative 9x would be a positive 9x. Alright, now that we got that established, now we're going to talk about distributing a negative number. When distributing a negative number, you are multiplying each term within the parentheses by the negative number outside the parentheses. So our distributor is going to be on the outside this time. This results in finding the, finding the opposite of each term within the parentheses. So my example here, now I have a negative that's being distributed. So it's a negative 3 times a positive 2, a negative 3 times a positive 4x. I know this is a positive 4x because this sign in front of it goes with it. It's a plus sign, so I know this guy's a positive. Nothing's in front of this guy, so he's understood to be positive. So I'm distributing, multiplying everything by a negative 3. So this is what this example shows. They're multiplying the negative 3 times a 2, a negative 3 times the positive 4x, and they simplify that to get negative 6 plus a negative 12x. Well, this section right here, it's a lot of extra signs. I have a plus and a minus sitting next to each other. You can simplify that even further and just write negative 6 minus 12x, because remember this sign shows, sits in front, so it shows that it is a negative 12x. So I don't need that plus sign placeholder. Alright, so we're going to practice this. Down below, number 1 here, we're going to distribute our negative number. So I need negative 2 times g. G understood to have the 1 in front of it. So negative 2 times that 1 gives me negative 2 g. Remember, it takes 2 negative numbers to turn positive. Or we talked about a while back, even amount of negative numbers turns positive, odd amount of negative numbers stay negative. So now I have a negative 2 times a positive 5, negative 2, so a negative times a positive, that's one negative number, that's odd, so it stays negative. Then 2 times 5 is 10. And I look at my two terms. Remember, terms are separated by plus and minus signs. I see I have a term here, This last name's G, this last name is a constant. They cannot combine because they don't have the same last name. So this is simplified. That would be your final answer. Alright, I'm going to go to number 3. I'm distributing a -2 to all terms. There's 2 terms in the parentheses. So I have a -2 times G, or a 1G. That gives me -2G. Then I have a -2 times a -5. That minus goes with that 5. It's a -5. So a negative times a negative, that's 2 of them. It cancels out, makes a positive. So negative times negative is positive. 2 times 5 is 10. Now I always see if I can combine like terms. I have last name G, last name constant. Can't combine them, they're not alike, so that would be my final answer. Okay, I'm going to move to 6. Distributing a -3 this time to 2 different terms in the parentheses. I have -3 times a -4a. Well, negative times negative gives me positive, so I know it needs to be a positive. 3 times 4 gives me 12. It's going to be a positive 12. And I need to keep my last name of the A. I got married, kept the last name of an A. Then I need to do the second term, negative times a positive. Remember, this is like a +2. Negative times a positive. It's odd, so it's got to be negative. 3 times 2 is 6. There's no letters involved, so that's it for that term. Now in C, I have last name of an A, last name constant. They're not alike, so that would have to be my final answer there. And moving to 8, I have a -3 I'm distributing again. It's going to a -4a, and it's also going to a -2. Even though it says -2, it's a -2. Sign in front goes with it. So a negative times a negative, my first term is going to be positive. 3 times 4 gives me 12. Last name is going to be A when they multiplied and married together. Then next term I have a negative times a negative. That gives me a positive. 3 times 2 is 6. See if I can combine like terms. I cannot. They are different terms, so I cannot combine. That would be my final answer. Okay, I would like you to pause the video trying the remainder 4 problems. Then as your group discuss these questions and come up with an answer, when you start the video back, I will show you the answers. Alright, the answers to these. For number 2, 2g minus 10. 4, 2g plus 10. 5, negative 12a minus 6. 7, negative 12a plus 6. The question said, what do you notice about questions 1 through 4? Okay, well, I noticed they were basically all the same. Okay, I noticed they're pretty much same numbers involved, it's just different signs. So in each set, the negative value changed the sign of the terms inside the parentheses, because depending on what was inside the parentheses changed my outcome of my answer. What mistakes might be made when distributing a negative? you should have come up with, it would be easy to forget to distribute the second negative number, or forget to multiply the value outside the parenthesis with the second term in the parenthesis. A lot of people just multiply this first term and think they're done. They forget to do this second term. Or a lot of people forget to pay attention to a negative times a negative, or a negative times a positive. Paying attention to your signs. Alright, moving on to the back side. I am going to work a couple here. Number 11, same concept, I'm distributing. This time I'm distributing a negative a half. So I'm having negative a half times 6t, negative a half times a positive 2. Well, a negative times a positive here, it's going to be a negative, so I know it's going to be negative. Half times 6, anytime you're multiplying half times anything, you're just taking half of the number. So half of 6 is 3. And I need my little t. Okay. Then I need to distribute to the second term. Negative times a positive. My next term is going to be negative. Half times 2. So half of 2 is 1. And that would be, neither are like terms, so can't combine. And that would be your final answer. Okay, number 13 and 14, I added an extra number because you don't see very many problems like this on the worksheet, but you will see some on homework and test. So go on 13 and 14 and add the number 4 to the beginning of both problems. And I'm going to work the problem with a 4 minus 3, then parentheses, 4 minus 2, then the parentheses. Okay, I'm going to work number 13. It looks a little different because I have a lot of stuff on the outside of the parentheses. You always do distributive property first. I still have my distributive property going on, except I have a little extra I have to take care of later. I see the thing stuck to my parentheses is a 3, but the sign that's in front of it is a minus. That means this is a negative 3. So I'm distributing a negative 3 to the negative p, a negative 3 to a positive 7. And I'm going to leave this 4 guy outside to deal with him later. I'm just going to say 4 plus. I'll deal with him later. So a negative 3 times a negative p, that's understood to be a 1. Negative times a negative turns positive. Well, I already got a positive. 3 times 1 is 3 with my new last name. Now I have negative 3 times a positive 7. Negative times a positive is a negative. 3 times 7 gives me 21. Now, looking at my problem, I see I have 3 terms. 1, 2, 3. So most likely somebody can combine. I have a constant, last name P, and a constant. So my 2 constants can get combined together. I have a constant of a positive 4 and a constant negative 21. Those are different signs. Subtract, keep the sign of the larger number. So this guy, I'm not doing anything with. I'm just going to bring him on down. This different sign, subtract, keep the sign of the larger number. 21 minus 4 gives me 17. The larger number is negative, so it's a minus 17. There are no more like terms, so this would be my final answer. I'll leave 14 for you to do a little bit later. I'm going to move on. You'll have time to check that later. To number 15. Alright, 15 says, write an expression for the perimeter of the rectangle. Well, if you remember, perimeter is adding up all your sides. They only gave me 2 side lengths. Well, I know this side length's got to be the same as this side length because rectangles have some matching sides, so I know this is x plus 6. And I know this guy has to be 3x minus 2. So I know perimeter means add up all your sides and you have your distance around. So I could sit here and write out all my, write 3x minus 2 plus 3x minus 2 plus x plus 6 plus x plus 6. Or I could combine some people right now. How many sets of this side do I have that match? I have 2 sets. So I could use a distributive property saying, hey, I have 2 sets that say x, 3x minus 2. In perimeter, we add up the sides, so I'm going to do a plus. And then I have 2 sets that say x plus 6. So here is an expression. I could simplify this expression because anytime you have distributive property you can simplify. I can do 2 times 3x gives me 6x. 2 times a negative 2 gives me a negative 4. Bring down my plus. 2 times x gives me 2x. And 2 times a positive 6 gives me a positive 12. Now I have 4 terms here. I can see if anybody can combine. I have a positive 6 and a positive 2 can combine to give me 8 x's. I have a negative 4 and a positive 12 can combine. Those are different signs. Subtract. Keep the sign of the larger number. So larger numbers positive. Subtract. And I get 8. So here would be the expression of what the perimeter of this rectangle would be. Okay, I'm going to save 16 last. 17, the expression below represents the area of the rectangle. What are the possible side lengths of the rectangle? Okay, so we've worked with little squares before. Here is my total area. I need to pull out something that is in common with both of these terms to see what side lengths could this represent. We've kind of done this before. So I'm taking out a greatest common factor. It could be different. It doesn't have to be the greatest common factor. It could be any factor. I don't really know what size this line is right now. So I see my 2 numbers I'm dealing with is 12 and 6. I know one option that both of these numbers have in common is 2. If I took out a 2, 2 times what's going to give me a 12x? I know 2 times 6x gives me 12x. Then 2 times what gives me a positive 6? Well, 2 times a positive 3 would give me that. So this could be one possible side length of the rectangle. There could have been a different number I could have factored out of the 12 and a 6. I could have factored out possibly a 3. Well, 3 times what gives me 12x? 3 times 4x. 3 times what will give me this positive 6? That would be 3 times a positive 2. So this could be another option for possible side lengths of the rectangle. And I believe there is one more. I could have taken, I did 2, I did 3, I could have taken a whole 6 out. 6 times what's going to give me 12x? That would be 2x. 6 times what gives me a positive 6? Well, 6 times a positive 1 is going to give me that. So that could be another option of the side links. 3 different options there. Okay, 18 will be done the same way. You're going to do that problem in a minute. It looks like there's going to be 4 different options you could take out and have different side links of this one. Okay, I'm going to actually start 16 and you're going to finish it. 16 says determine the distance between point A and B, here to here, if A to C is 10x minus 5. The whole line from A to C is 10x minus 5. Okay, I need to figure out what this little part is. I know this part is 2x plus 7. Well, if I knew that this was 20 and this was 5, how would I find this line? You would obviously have to subtract. Okay, it's not 20, I'm just saying if it was. So I need to take this guy and subtract off this guy to find how long this guy is. So I'm going to write that 10x minus 5. He needs to subtract off this guy, 2x plus 7. And that whole thing needs to be subtracted off. Alright, so I see a distributive property here. There's no number right here, but what always, if there's never a number written, what's it understood to be? It's understood to be a 1. So this is like a negative 1 right here. I've got to distribute a negative 1. If this was a plus sign, I would be distributing a positive 1. Well, that would be easy. Nothing changes when you distribute a positive 1. But since this is a negative, I have to distribute a negative 1 to everyone. So this needs to be simplified. I'm going to distribute a negative 1 to both terms. So negative 1 times 2x gives me a negative 2x. Negative 1 times a positive 7 gives me a negative 7. Now I can start combining like terms and simplify that. So I'd like you to finish this problem off, do problem 18 and all the other problems we have not finished, and then buzz me when you're ready for me to check.